Welcome to my talk on building a product users want. I'd like to spend the next half an hour to discuss how a product strategy can help you maximize the chances of achieving product success and providing a valuable and beneficial product. And the first step I'd like to take with you is to talk about what I mean by product strategy and complement strategy with a vision. And in order to do so, I'd like to introduce you a very simple template. It's called the Product Vision Board. And as you can see, it consists of 5 sections. So the dark section at the top is there to encourage you to describe the vision of your product. Now, what do I mean by vision? Vision, in my mind, should really capture the purpose of the product, the positive change it should bring about. It should describe the product's ultimate goal. Say that I have the idea of offering a little app that maybe integrates with smart scales and smartwatches and helps people become more aware of what they eat and when they eat and maybe how much they eat. Then the vision behind that product could be to help people eat healthily. So as you can tell, I like to work with a big, ambitious vision, a vision that transcends the actual product and doesn't talk about the solution. And such a big vision makes it more likely that people buy into it, and that it's a shared vision, a vision that aligns people, that acts as the true north and exercises some pull. And also I'd like to make sure that the visions that I use are concise, so it's easier to memorize them, such as healthy eating or helping people eat healthily, so that when the going gets tough, people hopefully will remember the vision, and the vision then provides some inspiration and motivation, which is the general idea behind a vision. So inspiring people and helping people to move towards the same big overarching goal. So if you currently don't use a vision, then I'd encourage you to experiment with one, because I feel that the vision really is the first step for then selecting the right product strategy. Only once we understand the overarching goal we'd like to get to, can we then consider what is the right path, what is the right approach to choose. Talking about the path and the approach, the strategy, I like to include 4 key elements in any strategy description. And I think there are 4 key sections that any strategy should really contain or explore and talk about. The first one is the target group. And so the question here is which market or market segment does the product address, and does the market exist? It's a worthwhile question to ask yourself when you're working on a disruptive product, say like the original iPhone. But also in a different sense, does the market exist? Do we have access to that market? Is it a market that we serve or that we have offered products or services in before? So is it a market that we know, that we understand? And then who are the users and customers? Are the users and customers the same people, or are they distinct? And if so, maybe they will then have different concerns, different needs and wants. And are there any qualities, any characteristics, any attributes that we could list so that we can tell who is part of the target group, who's part of the audience, who's part of the segment, and who isn't? So that's the first section. It's all about the beneficiaries, the people who should benefit from the product. The second section is about the needs. And by needs, I mean the main problem that the product addresses, or the primary benefit that it provides. So I find that digital products usually offer one primary benefit or address a main problem. So take for instance Google Maps or Apple Maps, helps you to get from A to B, so probably addresses a problem. Or a product like Instagram, Facebook or Snapchat help you stay in touch with friends, so offers a benefit. And a mistake I commonly see people make when it comes to working with needs and describing a product strategy is that people list all sorts of needs. But I would really encourage you to say, what is the primary reason for people to interact with the product? What's the main motivation for people to choose the product? And therefore, what is the main problem or the primary benefit? And if you feel that you would like to include secondary needs, then that's okay. But I would then recommend prioritizing your needs and clearly stating, making clear which is the main need. And the second recommendation here that I'd like to share with you is to make the needs specific enough that you understand what does it take to address them, and so that you know what are the conditions that have to be fulfilled to do a good job for the users. Yeah? So needs is all about the value that the product should create for the users, the reason for people to interact with your product, and the reason why the product should benefit the target group. And I find only once I have a good understanding of the target group and the needs, is it then valuable to think more about the product and consider what type of product should it be. Should it be a mobile app, a web app, both variants? Is there something else? Does it go beyond a digital product? Is hardware and plastics required? And then what makes the product stand out or special? How is it differentiated in the marketplace? Why would people choose it over competing offerings? Take, for instance, the Google Chrome browser. When Google developed the browser about 10 years ago, it intended to enter an existing market and faced fierce competition. Think of browsers like Internet Explorer and Firefox, for instance. And so the development team said, well, our new browser, it should be safe, it should be fast, and it should be simple to use. So safety, speed, and simplicity were the three key features that helped shape the product and ensured that it was adequately differentiated and gave people a clear reason to choose it over competing offerings. And finally, is it feasible to develop the product? Do the technologies exist? And do you have the knowledge and skills in order to leverage those technologies? Or can you acquire those skills? Can you train people? Or can you maybe hire people with the right skills within a reasonable time frame and at a realistic cost? And so when you start with needs and target group and then reflect back on the product, that may mean that your original idea is changing or has already changed, or you're starting to change it. But that's great if that happens, because it means that you're now in the process of building a product that people actually want, rather than just being attached to your original product idea and somehow trying to retrofit it, or somehow to trying to make it work. So don't be surprised again if you start with an initial product idea and then you see a change once you explore the target group and the needs. And then finally, I find it very valuable to think about the business goals, the desired business benefits that your product should provide. So how is the product going to benefit the company? That's the question here. Products exist purely to generate value in my mind. They're value creating vehicles to create value for the users, customers, and for the business. So how is it going to benefit the company? Is it going to generate revenue directly, as in the case of this little program here that I'm using to show you the slides, Microsoft PowerPoint, a revenue generating digital product? Or is it going to generate revenue indirectly by marketing or helping sell another product or service? Think of iTunes, for instance. iTunes was, in my mind, primarily created in order to help sell iPods and then iPhones. Or is it maybe more about productivity enhancements or cost reduction, as it's often the case for traditional IT applications? Or is it about developing the brand, increasing brand equity? Whatever it is, I find it very valuable to make those goals explicit and again prioritize them and clearly state which of those goals is the most important one to create clarity and facilitate alignment. And then I would encourage you to take another step and state targets. So you can then select the right KPIs, key performance indicators, the metrics that you'll use in order to measure product performance. Now, I know this can be tricky, particularly when you develop a brand new product or when you're making bigger changes to an existing product. But if you don't try and state any targets or any ranges, then it'll be very difficult to see if the strategy is working and to see and to understand if and how the product is performing. So as long as it's literally a line in the sand and not something set in concrete or carved in stone, I like to work with targets here and select an initial set of KPIs. And I'd encourage you to do the same thing. So that was my take on what is a vision and what is a strategy. Now, if you like this template, if it resonates with you, great. You can download it from my website. If it doesn't resonate with you, that's great too. It's not about a specific template, filling out some boxes or forms. It's really just about bringing awareness to what is a vision, what is a strategy, what are the key elements of a product strategy, what are the questions that you should consider exploring and answering. That's the key point here. Now, before I talk about who should maybe create the strategy, let me put it into context and talk about why, in a way, the strategy is important, or what happens if you don't have a understood and communicated and accepted, agreed strategy. Now, as I've mentioned before, I'm a big fan of working with a vision in order to inspire people and align people at a very, in a way, fundamental level. So vision is all about ultimate purpose of your product, describing the overall or ultimate goal. And then once you have the vision, then you're in a position to derive the product strategy. And again, the strategy is about the approach that you intend to choose in order to get closer to your goal. So the path to the goal. And then with a strategy in place, I feel you're in a good position to take the next step and think about, now, what about an actionable product plan? What about a product roadmap that describes the journey of the product over say, the next 12 months or so, and has some specific milestones or steps and talks about some specific product benefits and product releases and product goals you'd like to achieve over that time frame, thereby implementing or executing the product strategy. And such a roadmap allows you then to derive the product backlog, which contains all the product details, including the user stories and epics, maybe mock-ups, sketches, and other artifacts. So if there is no product strategy, then I feel there's a real void between the vision and the product backlog. And for me, then it's also difficult, if you choose to work with a product roadmap, to understand where's the roadmap coming from. So for me, the strategy really plays a vital point in that chain. And hence, I'd encourage you to work with a product strategy, or start working with a product strategy, not only when you're building a brand new product or making bigger changes to an existing product, such as taking it to a new market or market segment, but also if you feel your product is fairly steadily growing, or is maybe maturing, or pretty stable, mature product, it can be very worthwhile to sit down and reflect on what was the vision again, and who really are the users and who are not the users, and what is the value that we create for the users, and maybe what problems do we not intend to address, and so forth. So yeah, vital element in a chain, in a product planning chain. That's how I would position and view the product strategy. Now, who should create the strategy? In my mind, a product strategy, just like a product vision, is best created collaboratively, using a strategizing, visioning, product discovery workshop. And different people like to use different terms. So the key, again, is doing it together in my mind. Now, who are the right people to involve? I would suggest the product owner, the person in charge of the product. So the individual, I find, should evangelize in the vision hold up the vision, but be in charge of the strategy and also the product tactics, the details. Then the development team or representative subset members of the development team. And by development team, I mean a cross-functional group of people who are responsible for designing and implementing and testing and documenting the product. So I would expect that people with UX design skills are part of that team, people who have software architecture knowledge, people who know about how to work with specific programming languages and write code, people who know how to test software, and so forth. And then the right stakeholders, the key internal stakeholders, and who those individuals are will very much depend on your product and organization. And if you're not quite sure, you may have to perform a stakeholder analysis and consider who are those people who have a real interest in the product and somehow hold some power over the product. That is, who can influence product decisions, or who are the individuals you need in order to develop and provide the product. Now, for a commercial product, that could be somebody from sales, somebody from marketing, and maybe somebody from support or finance, for instance. And then it can also be useful to invite an Agile coach, a Scrum Master, to help facilitate the session, maybe establish some ground rules, think about how to achieve full participation, give everybody the opportunity to be heard and speak, and avoid that some individuals maybe dominate. Now, the beauty in my mind of a collaborative approach is that you get all the ideas and concerns, views and perspectives out in the open, that people hear what the other individual, what the other person is thinking of, what the interest of the other people are, that you leverage the collective knowledge and creativity, and hopefully have a stronger buy-in and sense of collective shared ownership for vision and strategy. But of course, with people coming together, having different interests, different backgrounds, that there might be friction and there might be conflict. And so if no consensus can be achieved, I feel it's important that one person can break the deadlock and decide. And in my mind, that's the product owner. So I feel the product owner here in this meeting has a leadership role, and as I said, should make a decision after everybody's had her or his say if no consensus can be achieved. And as I've mentioned before, the Scrum Master is there, Scrum Master Agile Coach is there to facilitate and make sure that everybody is heard and the right decision-making approach is chosen. So if you currently develop the product strategy, I don't know, individually, in the sense that maybe the product person, the product owner, locked away in her or his office, creates the strategy and then goes from stakeholder to stakeholder and says, here it is, what you think, and sort of acts as a go-between mediator in the end, then maybe you could consider trying a collaborative approach, bringing everyone together. Something, as I said, I very much favor, and that I find works out quite well if you do the right prep work. Now we've talked about vision and strategy. I've talked about vision and product strategy. We talked about why the strategy is important, what happens when you don't have a strategy, who should create the strategy. Now, before we start implementing the product strategy, I feel there's one more step that we should take, and that really is to do some strategy validation. And in a way, test out the strategy before we commit to building the actual product, be it a brand new product or be it a product update. And as they say, the proof is in the pudding. So I feel it's helpful to look into techniques that help us get a taste for the strategy, so we understand how successful it's likely to be. And the approach, the process I'd like to suggest is based on Eric Ries's Lean Startup. It's an iterative process, and it starts by creating a strategy based on essentially what we know right now. Now, if that's the approach we take, then the strategy is likely to contain a lot of risks, assumptions, uncertainties, that we should now address in order to avoid that we just in a way naively implement this initial strategy, and then the product fails, it bombs, or it seriously under-delivers, and we don't experience content or happy users, and we don't experience product success. So the first step here, and I would suggest that you consider doing this together with the key stakeholders, the people who've helped you create the initial product vision and strategy, maybe as part of the initial strategizing effort, strategizing workshop, that you identify the key risks. And the key risks, in my mind, are those uncertainties, unknowns in your product strategy that you should address right now to avoid making the wrong decisions, going down the wrong path, and potentially then building a product that nobody really wants and needs. And then prioritize and select the biggest, the most urgent risk. And I find that's often, particularly for brand new products, a risk around value proposition, needs, problem, benefit, or around target group. Have we identified the right group of people, the people who are likely to benefit most from the product? And then decide how to address the risk. So if the risk is around value proposition and target group, maybe it's then a case of observing people, directly observing people, interviewing people in order to find out how they solve a problem today and what their eating habits are, and how aware they are of their eating habits and what they do in order to eat healthily, for instance, to go back to the example of a healthy eating product. But if it's maybe more about getting the key features right, or addressing a technical risk, then it may make more sense to work with a prototype, a pre-launch MVP, or a spike, a throwaway prototype, say to investigate integration with various smart scales, for instance. And then the third step here in this process will be to carry out the technique, implement the measure, and collect the data. And that data could be qualitative in nature in terms of feedback, from talking to people or from observing how people, for instance, eat today, or track their eating behavior, if they do that at all. Or it could be quantitative if you release a pre-launch MVP to selected users, and see how they work with this early version of your product, how they use it. And once we've got the relevant data, we can take the next and final step in this process, and decide what to do, evaluate the data and generate the necessary insights. And so the first option is to persevere, and that means, the data analysis shows that the strategy is likely to be successful, it looks good, but you may still want to make some adjustments or refinements. Maybe there's some more risks left that you want to address. Pivot would mean that the data that you've collected suggests that something is wrong, quite wrong. So it's a failure experience, you could say. And now you have to make bigger adjustments to the product strategy or change your strategy. So instead of building a mobile app to help people eat more healthily, I could, for instance, choose to write a book or run workshops to help people become more aware, more mindful of what and how they eat. So those would be two alternative, different strategies, and that would be referred to as a pivot. And the final option is to stop, to say, maybe we've iterated over the strategy here a few times, maybe even you've pivoted once or twice, but there's still significant risks left. Don't quite know what else you could do, or you're running out of time and money for this validation and product discovery work here. And then it might be the best decision to say, let's stop, let's look for a new vision, a new idea, and give up on the current one. So it is an iterative process. The idea is that you iterate over your product strategy until you've sufficiently de-risked it, and that means no major risks are left, and you're pretty confident that you've nailed the value proposition, target group, the key features of your product, the key differentiators, and the business goals, and of course that those business goals are viable, and there is a business model that in one way or another monetizes the product. And then I feel you're in a good position to commit to the product and the development effort and build the actual product, be it a brand new product or be it a major update. So what this process does is it carries out just in time, just enough market and user research, rather than spending, say, several weeks or several months upfront with big market research and big user research. So this is a leaner, I feel, potentially faster and more focused way of generating the necessary information, because you always focus on the biggest risk or the biggest, boldest assumption hypotheses. So let's assume that everything went well. We've found a valid strategy, a strategy that seems to be valid, and we've launched our either brand new product or we've released an updated version of the product. Then as soon as people start using the product, I feel it's a good idea to collect the relevant data and also to schedule a first strategy review session, so we can then see if our product is performing well and the strategy is working, or if we need to update the strategy and make any changes to it. And the 4 factors that I find helpful to look into in order to decide if and how the strategy should be changed, or should be adjusted, or if you possibly have to pivot at this stage. The first and maybe the most important one is really the product performance. So how's your product doing in terms of meeting its goals, particularly its business goals? This goes back to the discussion earlier about the product strategy and making business goals explicit and thinking about targets and selecting the right KPIs. So here you'd use your KPIs, your key performance indicators, in order to measure how the product is doing. How engagement is developing, how user acquisition is developing, how the product quality is developing, how team morale is developing. Very much depends on what KPIs are appropriate for your product, and so how you're trending. That's the question here that you'd like to explore. And of course, if what you're seeing are negative trends, then that's a reason for concern, because either your strategy is wrong and you have to correct it, or you're not doing a good job at executing the strategy. And again, then you probably need to take the appropriate action. The next thing I like to explore are trends, opportunities for new technologies, but maybe also some threats here. That technologies that you use in your product are maybe slowly going obsolete. Maybe also regulatory trends, depending on the type of product that you look after. Certainly a concern for those of you working on healthcare products and telecommunication products. I like to look at what's happening inside the company, if there are any bigger changes, maybe in the management team, senior management leadership team, or in the business strategy. As I would expect that if the business strategy changes, you'll have to update your product strategy. Product strategy should help execute the business strategy, in my mind. So any bigger changes in the company. And finally, what about the competition? How's the competition doing? Is the competition about to launch a product that has some features that could leapfrog your product? Is there anything that you need to do in order to stay ahead or stay competitive? I find it very helpful to try and proactively review and update the strategy. So you steer your product rather than being reactive, and you discover, oh my God, I don't know, new regulations about to become law. We need to do something quick. Or oh no, the competition's already launched this new product, and it's got some killer features, and oh my God, how are we going to respond to this? So my suggestion is at least once a quarter, get together again with the key stakeholders, the people who've helped you with the initial strategizing effort around formulating an initial vision and strategy, and maybe some of the validation work. Get together with them again on a regular basis, at least once a quarter, as I said, and look at the data, look at the product performance, look at all the other factors, and together figure out how you're doing, if the strategy is still valid or not, and if and how the strategy should be adjusted. So again, you can leverage people's collective knowledge and creativity. You make sure there's shared understanding and hopefully buy-in to any strategy decisions that you take. And that's all I've got time for today. There is more information available if you'd like to find out more about my thoughts and suggestions on vision and strategy. First of all, on my website, romanpischler.com. I've also written a book on product strategy and product road mapping practices called Strategize, so maybe something to consider. And finally, I'd really appreciate your feedback and questions. Feel free to reach out to me by email, Twitter, or other social media channels. It'd be great to hear from you. So I hope this was helpful for you, and thank you for your interest. Thank you for watching.